Senior Private Sector Advisor for the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems team at UNDP, the FACS team. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. I'll start with Greta.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greta, and I work in the Food and Agriculture Commodity Systems team together with Matthew, and I'm a Program Coordination Associate Officer. Over to my colleague, Lara. You are muted, Lara.
Apologies, everyone. Hi, it's still early for me. I'm Lara Jacob. I work with the Climate Finance Unit at the United Nations Environment Program. And my role is basically to offer capacity building for financial institutions. Over to you, Christina, I think, who's on the line. Or is that it, Greta?
She might not have joined yet. That's okay. And we have our FACS community team here with Alex and Philippe managing everything behind the scenes. So this workshop is organized through the FACS community, the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, and it is being recorded. We do have French interpretation available, which you can access through your Zoom interface. And if anybody speaks only French, please do let us know in the chat box, as that would be helpful for discussion. All right, let's go ahead and get my slides going. So I think I see in the participants list, many of you probably were here yesterday, which is great. We had a good discussion yesterday and a good introduction to the value beyond value chains in the context of the FOLR program. I'm going to go through some of today's objectives. So yesterday we went through primarily what we call the what and the why, in terms of why companies should collaborate more with governments, and how does it make business sense, and how can it improve the production of increase the sustainable production of agricultural commodities. So today we're going to look more at the how. So objectives are to learn more practically how to collaborate effectively with governments in producer countries to create those enabling environments that we discussed yesterday for sustainable production. We can discuss some of the different challenges in doing that practically, and we will also highlight some case studies of experience that companies and others have had that they can share, and point a little bit more to the specific opportunities under the FOLR program. So the Food Systems Land Use Restoration Impact Program, FOLR program, is what these workshops are organized under. So the audience and the participants are primarily those engaged in the FOLR program and the 27 country projects that are funded by the program. So the program is funded by Global Environment Facility and is led by the World Bank. It's a program over 7 years, so it's just getting underway in many countries. And so the goal is for the companies, country project teams, and any other stakeholders who are interested in learning more about potential partnerships and collaboration opportunities for agriculture, sustainable, improving agricultural production in these projects, to kind of get a first set of training information today. And this training is also being offered as the FACS community, so the material is beneficial to those even outside of FOLR. I know we have some folks who are joining that are either part of the community or have learned about the workshop elsewhere, and so that is also welcome. And please feel free to follow up to learn more, suggest any additional trainings, and stay up to date with the FACS community so you can learn about any other upcoming events and share knowledge with other TAC practitioners. I think, Greta, do we have a Menti today?
Yes, we have a short Mentimeter again today, so you can stop sharing your screen and I will share mine. Thank you. So I hope you are quite familiar with the way that Menti works. So I will give you some time to go to www.menti.com and enter the following code. In the meanwhile, if your name doesn't look correct in the in Zoom, please rename yourself. And also, it would be helpful if you can add the organization that you work for, so that also for the discussions that we will have later, we can identify where you come from and which organization you represent. Also, I believe my colleagues will put in the chat the code to enter Mentimeter. So I will start with the first question. If you have participated in yesterday's session, yes? Most of you, I think, you participated. Great. So it's great. So you know already what we spoke about yesterday. Matthew will provide also a brief recap, and you will have the opportunity to ask any further questions or clarification from yesterday. And for the person that hasn't joined yesterday, no problem. As I mentioned, Matthew will give you an update, and we will also share the recording so you can watch what happened yesterday. Next, so please share one thing that you learned yesterday or that you want to learn. Feel free to write whatever comes to your mind. And again, I want to highlight what Matthew just said, that this is really quite a general training, and we are here available for you in the next month and next year to provide something more in-depth according to your needs, and especially tailored to your context. So one response, how to partner with the private sector. Today we will try to analyze how to do this in practice. Great, it's not one size fits all. That's definitely important to remember. Start engaging more productively, engage with the private sector. Companies face challenges in meeting international standards given complex national challenges, and how to reducing on food poisoning, especially starting from post-harvest level onwards. How to make producers engaged with the private sector. Great. So thank you very much. If you found it difficult to answer by Mentimeter, you can also do that through the chat, knowing specialized platforms related to private sector and value chain. Good. Thank you all for your answers and your contribution. Matthew, back to you.
All right, thank you, Greta. As Greta mentioned, I think we're going to do, I want to do a little bit of a recap. I'm just going to highlight one slide from yesterday that I think helps to summarize the value beyond value chains concept and what we're trying to think about here. So, my screen go. Bear with me. Great, okay. So yesterday we talked through kind of the, why is there a need for transformation in the production of agricultural commodities due to all the various systemic and operational risks. And then, why is collaboration outside of individual value chain with governments in multi-stakeholder processes necessary? And so I think this here kind of summarizes the concept quite well, and that, sorry. What we're really looking to do is address the enabling environment in order to raise standards across the board or to lift the floor, whichever metaphor you'd like. Given that, when there's a focus on individual supply chains, which has been kind of the reality for the last 10 to 15 years, you get islands of best practice where, there are some areas are improved, but bad practices are pushed elsewhere and leaving the underlying environmental and social issues unaddressed. And so that leads to companies who are at the forefront of these sustainability initiatives at perhaps a commercial disadvantage to the companies who are, not engaged in such sort of more sustainable practices. And, underlying, yes, as I mentioned, underlying environmental issues remain. And so the idea is to work with for companies to be working with governments, both at national scales and subnational scales, and we'll get into that today, to raise those standards across the board so that we can create a more level playing field for all companies in order to reduce that cost differential between those legal minimums and industry best practice, create sector-wide capacity building, and transformation across the entire region. So I think that can set the context for today. We're going to get more into the how. I'm going to stop for a second and then open up today's slides. Bear with me. If there's any questions from yesterday, please do feel free to raise a hand. During the presentation, it may be helpful just to type it into the chat. But if there's anything clarifying from yesterday, please do let us know.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Matthew, yes, thank you. That for financial institutions, I mean, a lot of the same principles and concepts that Matthew outlined as motivators for engagement also apply to financial institutions, even though they're a little further down the value chain in terms of the link with corporates and governments.
And we will get into more on the FI side today as well.
Yes, we will.
Okay. So what does engaging beyond value chains mean in practice? How can we apply some of these concepts in more concrete, practical ways in your work? So companies can engage, we think, beyond value chains in several ways. Typically, that means working with other stakeholders, particularly governments, to define shared goals and develop action plans. And engagement beyond the value chain involves collaboration with local or national governments and working with companies and stakeholders in and beyond commodity producing regions. It can take many forms, but working in coalitions, developing working groups, national or subnational commodity platforms, and roundtables and other multi-stakeholder initiatives. So it's really multi-stakeholder in nature, but in order to shape that policy enabling environment, government engagement is crucial. Here we see some of the key characteristics of a successful multi-stakeholder platform. looking at interministerial government support, facilitation. I'm not going to read through all of this. I'll just leave it up on the screen for a minute. And on the left there, we see all the different types of multi-stakeholder that are involved in the processes, which across producers, buyers, FIs, governments, civil society, international organizations. I think one key thing to highlight here, and that our colleagues from Uganda yesterday, in discussing their work on coffee, noted that these processes do take time. So we see speed there, moving slow enough to facilitate genuine stakeholder participation, but fast enough to maintain momentum and reduce risk from changes in the political environment. So this is quite a challenge when it comes to multi-stakeholder processes. We know that companies tend to move more quickly than governments and international organizations, and so it's also a balancing act between developing things like trust and shared ownership, which takes time when engaging, particularly in new stakeholder environments. So I think that's something that is important to note. Many of the, I would say, more successful initiatives over the last several years have taken many years to come to fore, and I think that's just something to keep in mind. Yeah. So how to engage beyond value chains depends on where you are now. And so there's a number of different ways in which to do that, and it depends on the size of the company, what part of the value chain you are in, and we will get into some of these details of which sourcing regions are strategically important, and the local presence and capacity that you do have, and how mature is your sustainability strategy. Apologies, I need to stop sharing. There's an issue with my PowerPoint. Bear with me. There we go. So in terms of the size of the company, will it have influence engaging with governments in production regions? Does it have the resources to engage in multi-stakeholder processes? And in different parts of the value chain, which we will look at in a few slides, it depends on the subsector that you're in and who your key stakeholders are. The most important production regions for the business operations in terms of profits and growth of the organization or the portfolio companies. Is there already a local presence in the region? Are you equipped in a multi-stakeholder process directly or indirectly? And is the organization still developing the basics for sustainability within its own operations? And this will also depend on size of company in many cases. So engagement can also vary depending on, the engagement is important at different kind of extents, I guess we'd say. So you can have low engagement, which could just consist of providing feedback on documents, consultations, contributing indirectly via industry associations. These can actually be quite important organizations as they they have coalitions of the private sector organizations. And then you can move into a medium level of engagement, which is more participation in meetings, more direct participation in those coalitions, communications, advocacy, and working with other companies, peer companies and suppliers. And then perhaps a sort of moderate levels of funding into some of these processes. And then you have higher levels of engagement. And, that's really taking leadership roles from a company's perspective in leading processes, leading technical working groups, delivering those technical assistance. So I think it's important to note that, it doesn't require high engagement in order to make contributions to creating that enabling environment. I think all companies involved in a particular landscape, jurisdiction, subnational area have a role to play. And so it's important to think about the different levels that are appropriate in your context. And so how can businesses and financial institutions engage with different levels of governance? So here we'll look at national versus subnational scales. So engagement at the national level, of course, is a crucial aspect of engaging in that to create that enabling environment, as national governments are responsible for critical aspects of the enabling environment through national laws, policies, and programs, which create those frameworks that actions can take place. And national governments can provide that strong leadership that it can kind of direct what happens at those subnational scales.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing the slides? Because we are not able to see, otherwise Alexandra will do that. No problem.
No, I would actually ask Matthew to do it. I'm just like the participants are raising that they can't see anything on the screen.
I was sharing, my apologies. I was having some PowerPoint issues. Okay, should be right now.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great.
Matthew, I think before you go on, sorry. Yeah, to the next. No, please continue with this slide. I just sort of had trouble following along where you were in terms of sections. I just wanted to sort of mention something about financial institution engagement. Just in terms of the how critical it is for FI similar to corporates to engage in these multi-stakeholder processes as well. Usually that takes the form of national level stakeholder processes that, Matthew will kind of get into, but irrespective of that, we also have other types of collaborations that FIs can join. For example, multi-stakeholder sector processes that Matthew alluded to in the previous section, such as the RSPO or RTRS. So, this is sort of an opportunity for financial institutions to take the lead in helping shape the, I would say, direction of the sector as well. So I wanted to highlight that point.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, apologies. I think the slide may be a little bit out of order.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is going through some of the national level ways that companies or governments can work, governments. So we're looking at aligning those national commitments and nationally determined contributions through the climate mitigation, looking at national biodiversity action plans. So companies aligning their commitments with those types of plans can really help support the sort of engagement with governments. Strengthening of laws on these various issues around land tenure, land use planning, ensuring alignment across cross-cutting issues in different government ministries is key as well, not just engaging with ministries of agriculture, but also environment, finance, health, education, and so on. Budget alignment, and then kind of joint alignment around accessing donor funding is also key. At the subnational level, creating regional economic development plans, local land use planning, aligning agendas across different departmental areas, those are also key. And I think it depends on the context of your particular company and a particular geography, where it makes the most sense at a subnational level to engage. But subnational landscape and jurisdictional initiatives, which involve working beyond value chains, are a central way through which companies can accelerate commodity transformation. And integrated landscape initiatives can be quite relevant in cases where an important landscape cuts across administrative boundaries. So initiatives with an ecological landscape or ecoregion focus can address and tackle landscape management in more detail than is possible at a jurisdictional scale. So I would think of in previous work I've done, I think the river basin, or the watershed, that's a key ecological boundary at which landscape level engagement is critical in order to be able to affect change as just the nature of the way water is. And then also at provincial or state level, governments may be responsible for those regional economic development planning. And so I think building new jurisdictional scale enablers, such as climate finance mechanisms and other accountability or finance tools, may be appropriate at that level. Laura, did you want to touch on this again, or there's another, I can jump to the next one. Just in the very last slide. So I think, yeah, this is when we're getting into what project management units can do with the finance sector. Laura, did you want to touch that now or wait till later?
Yeah, no, I think it's useful to sort of highlight that. Yeah, I think sort of similar to the story that you've just outlined for corporates, program management units and other stakeholders can engage with financial institutions to achieve a number of outcomes through specific activities. So the aim of this level of engagement is really about creating an enabling environment that is conducive for private sector financial flows. So, for example, promoting working with financial entities on technical assistance to promote a risk-based approach to lending. So this could be, supporting capacity building programs at the national level, working to sort of set up, kind of functional and detailed environmental permitting and data processes also at the national level, so that the banks and investors are able to sort of access this information for their lending. The second is, and this is particularly relevant when we talk about multi-stakeholder processes, is engaging with industry associations such as sustainable finance associations or commodity roundtables that we've mentioned. That is both on the risk side, but also on the solution side, to develop products and services for the food and agri sector, to help them transition to a more sustainable way of production. And then thirdly, on this creation of the enabling environment, sorry, my camera's off, is starting to engage with regulators, pardon me, such as central banks, to help foster an enabling environment for investors in sustainable land use practices. And, one of the examples, and this is not, directly related to this region, but, we've been working, for example, very closely through the Good Growth Partnership and now the FALUR project with the central banks of Brazil and Paraguay, to help them develop policies around environmental, social governance risk. And so this is more of a top-down approach where we see these sort of development of common standards that will help eventually lift up that entire sector. And so This is sort of more of a long-term engagement, the provision of technical assistance with regulatory bodies.
If I may, there is a question from Elizabeth, I believe, to Lara. Is it possible to associate decentralized financial services? Lara, if you wanna take this question. You are muted.
Pardon me, can you elaborate on that, Elizabeth? What do you mean by associate decentralized financial services, like microfinance? Or is it possible to create an association for decentralized financial services? If you can elaborate on your question, I hope to answer it.
Elizabeth, you are muted if you are speaking. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Ok, bonjour. J'étais en train de demander au Bénin, par exemple. Allô?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Ok. Au Bénin, il y a des structures de financement décentralisées.
Greta, if someone could translate for me, that would be really helpful. My French.
Avec lesquelles nous mettons en relation les producteurs. Donc, est-ce qu'ils ont des associations nationales et des représentations au niveau local? Donc, est-ce que c'est possible de les intégrer dans ce schéma?
Greta, can we
Yeah.
can we translate the specific question, please?
Yes, so from what I understood is if there are any example of sustainable financial association at a decentralized level or landscape level. That's what she's asking.
Yeah, that's more of a difficult one. Usually these are national level in nature. I think where we see the landscape level interventions by financial institutions is usually on a particular project or to achieve a particular outcome. So it's one or a number of financial institutions, usually a government entity, an impact fund, and usually another institution or two coming together to work on a particular project in the short term in a landscape. But oftentimes we don't have associations focused on a landscape level. So it's more project driven at the landscape level, and usually these financial entities work at the national level, to a lesser degree even the regional level if it's a trade issue, if it involves a trade issue. And I think it's because of oftentimes it's the sort of regulatory issues that these financial institutions are contending with. So they're not taking one approach for one landscape and a different type of financing approach for a different landscape. Example, so you're asking for associations of microfinance, and
Yes, piloted for non-profit organizations, Ali FACS in Benin.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of in the country of Benin, but yes, indeed, we do have associations and partnerships when it comes to microfinance. You know, the provision of microfinance, I should say.
Well, great. Thank you for the question, and Laura for the answer. So please do, everybody, continue to, if you have any questions in the chat, please put them in. In the interest of time, we're going to move to the next section, looking at what kinds of support can businesses and financial institutions provide outside their value chains. So companies can support multiple aspects of the enabling environment. I think coordination and collaboration is the central element to this, and looking at, you know, improving the communication, relationship building, information sharing, all the things in the middle circle there. Those are kind of the central underpinning for working companies working with governments. The goal being to deliver, you know, better production practices with more systemic solutions to improve production practices and improve farm support, supporting community development, looking at long-term solutions for social and economic development, and improved conservation and stronger land use governance. And I think identifying opportunities for pre-competitive collaboration between companies is key as well. The goal is not to be competing on who is more sustainable, but to be looking at a level playing field, which gets back to the first slide that the stuff we talked about yesterday, and facilitating more ambitious multi-party partnerships that can deliver long-lasting sectoral capacity building is crucial. I think we were running a little behind, so I'm going to jump ahead. As mentioned earlier, engaging beyond value chains does take time and commitment, and our colleagues yesterday also highlighted this. So it could take many forms, but generally it can follow these steps. So defining the scope and of the engagement and the allocation of resources, selecting a strategic initiative to participate in, and then agreeing on the scope of your engagement or human resources required. Establishing governance, coordination, and building trust. So deciding who will represent and project manage, and who will participate in planning and decision-making with partners and stakeholders. Implement and evolve interventions, so coordinating timelines and deliver to other stakeholders, and follow agreed steps for implementation, advancing your involvement if you choose to do so. Monitoring and evaluation, monitoring and evaluating your involvement through key performance indicators, looking for shared indicators and targets with other partners, and aligning these with the overall monitoring framework. And then communicate and report on shared progress. So collaborating with partners on shared messaging and strategic communications can help amplify to audience. And I think here I'll reiterate yesterday a point I was making and following on from some discussion. I think there is a bit of a challenge when it comes to private sector work in the space. So there's many companies that are doing good work and putting a lot of resources and efforts towards, you know, initiatives that are at the landscape and jurisdictional scale, making that long-term commitment, but not necessarily getting the recognition in the public or in the media about those efforts. And I think there's a balance to be struck between activism and pressuring companies to do the right thing, but also at the same time crediting those companies when they do the right thing. And I think sometimes that that balance is quite challenging to strike. So I just wanted to note that. Laura, I have a couple more FI stuff here if you wanted to take that, or I'm trying to monitor the time as well. But feel free to jump in if you like.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So for, and I just wanted to emphasize that previous point that Matthew made, because I think the same applies to financial institutions that, you know, oftentimes it's the bigger FIs or the more prominent names that get sort of put on the spotlight for their activities, for what they do or what they don't do. But oftentimes we also don't credit, you know, what is actually happening in those financial institutions that can help bring up the entire sector in terms of positive advancement. So I think the same principle applies to companies as it does to the finance sector proper. So in terms of what companies can do specifically to engage with financial institutions, and this is sort of a tricky one often because we tend to think of company engagement with financial institutions as quite one-sided. You know, they are there to receive loans or credit from their financiers, or they're an investee company. If it's dealing with an investor or asset manager, but in fact, there are a number of I would say sort of things that can come about with companies engaging with financial institutions. And this is really around aligning financial flows with sustainability outcomes. So it's partly in that kind of pre-competitive space that we talked about yesterday. So first and foremost, it's companies can engage with their financiers, you know, through multi-stakeholder initiatives or bilaterally, you know, when the financier undertakes the annual review process or the initial onboarding process. So this is sort of a trigger to start thinking about ESG criteria or environmental social governance criteria in lending practices. And, you know, what we ideally want is what, you know, the highest level possible being seen on the ground or in the lending practice. But, you know, that's not what precipitates eventually. And so through these dialogues, what we hope to achieve is a sort of harmonization of the environmental social governance criteria in lending practices and within the corporate operations to start meeting some of these sustainability goals or climate targets if that is in the strategic direction of your company. Secondly, and this is more on the solution side rather than on the risk side, is to start working together to develop solutions to de-risk the transition to deforestation-free production through innovative financial mechanisms such as blended finance. So I'll talk a bit about that when we get to the case study, but essentially this often takes place with a financier and one or two of their corporate clients and an NGO and a government stakeholder. And so what we see is oftentimes the financier is unable to take on the majority of the risk to help the client transition, just because these activities are so risky. So we need the added capital. So we call it blended finance for this reason, the added capital from another source to provide the guarantee for these de-risking activities. And thirdly, it's on the providing guidance and technical assistance needed to transition to deforestation-free production. So, either the financier can provide money for this technical assistance, or through oftentimes this is included in the lending agreement, or the financial entity is able to provide this technical assistance directly to the client to help with the transition to deforestation-free production. Thank you, Matthew.
Great, thank you, Laura. I think in the interest of time, and since we've presented a lot of information to everybody, I wanted to go ahead and open it up for any questions or discussion points. And we do have a couple case studies that we would like to present, one that Laura mentioned, and my colleague Christina at UNDP is also here. She can discuss some of the work we're doing with the International Coffee Organization. But before we jump into that, let's just open up the floor to any comments, questions, or kind of experiences that people want to share.
Lara, if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, maybe just as a sort of icebreaker to start the discussion. We've sort of heard a lot about, what corporates could do, some of the role of, and I know a lot of the people attending this session today also come from the FLOR projects themselves, the program management units. But, one question could be, how do you see your roles within the projects in helping facilitate some of these activities? So with respect to engagement with the finance sector, do the colleagues on the call see a role for example, facilitating data collection and usage for risk management, but also things like positive impact measurements or providing technical assistance, which we've just talked about? Do you sort of see a role for yourself in these specific activities to support both corporates and financial entities coming out of the FLOR projects?
Matthew?
Oh, hi. Good morning. Matthew Reddy here, private sector specialist with the GEF based in Washington, D.C. Apologies, I'm a little bit sick today. Just come back from International Rice Congress, where a number of projects under the Sustainable Rice Landscapes Initiative, we came together for our meeting there. We used that particular forum, and there's a couple of things that came out of that. And on this subject of finance, I think there needs to be potentially some work on defining and tailoring solutions for the finance sector. In this case, it was rice, and there's very little in terms of availability of finance that isn't sort of government-led for that particular sector. And so what they did was actually come together, the agencies, FAO and UNEP, with the help of GIZ, to work out what's needed, you know, a bit of a collaboration between the partners as to say, okay, what is it that we really need here from the finance sector to support the types of initiatives we're wanting to do? What are the financial instruments that are the most positive, and what messages can we then take to financial institutions to help, and what might be opportunities for blended finance where it was quite clear that the commercial terms were never going to be met for in a normal kind of transaction or for a normal loan type facility. So what could be the role of organisations like the GEF, GCF, or some of the multilateral development banks? So that was quite interesting, is how people can collaborate on looking at some of the solutions and working with the financial sector to identify, you know, possibilities for co-development of blended finance. So that was a good one. And then the other aspect I just want to touch on here is that the role of research institutes. So many of the commodities value chains that we're dealing with will also have a research partner or a number of research partners. That they could be, you know, the CGIAR type members, and they can be very useful in bringing some of the science and knowledge into programs as well. So I'd also add the R&D and CGIAR type partners, along with such organisations like the International Fertilizer Association, or you know, some of the sort of commodity research platforms, Harvest Plus, and some of the others. So you know, the role of science as well can also help bring in private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your contribution. Anyone else would like to
Just
comment?
following up on the other Matthew's comment there, on especially the second part. We had done a review within UNDP of the food and agricultural portfolio projects, looking at it from an agroecology perspective to see, you know, to what extent UNDP projects work on agroecology and, you know, engage in the principles around that. And one of the findings was a distinct lack of engagement in the research, science, and academic sectors amongst projects. So I think that's quite an important point that Matthew's raised, and yeah, it's clear that there should be more of that, and I think hopefully the Fuller program could potentially offer opportunities for those groups to engage. So yes, good flag there. Yep, as Greta said, anybody else have any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, otherwise I would like to invite exactly Luca. I was about to call you. If you can share your from Ili Cafe. Luca, please.
Yeah, I was just wanted to raise my hand, and you have put me on the floor. Thank you so much. Great. Just a few comments. First, it's more important than before the collaboration between the private and the public sector, because if we, for example, really want to be real sustainable and we touch the interest of the farmer, but the farmer has also other interests, other needs, social needs, and to diversify their revenues and this and that. So for this, the engagement with the public is important, because we have to be sustainable 100%, not only in coffee, when we deal with coffee farmers. And this is the point. We have a lot of relations with coffee farmers, and we know from them, what are their needs in terms of the project. And this is the point when we want to link these needs of the project with the financed project by UN, by you, and so on. The timing of the project in the field is one. The timing to finance this project is another. If it takes me 6 months or more to have approved one project, maybe this project is not yet in time because the needs they were urgent 6 months earlier. So please consider this alignment between the timing that public project has in respect on what it happens on the ground. Because this is the only way that we can have an impact on the communities. But I have to end my comments saying that we in Cafe, we have this experience with FAO and with UNIDO, and we find valuable collaboration. So FAO is incredible in what it has developed in terms of agricultural research. There is a lot of synergies we can do, but we have to consider this, the timing of the projects and the timing to finance the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca, for your contribution. Anyone else? Christina, would you like to comment, or Matthew?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for that. Luca, really interesting to hear your point. And I think it just made me reflect a bit on what Matthew mentioned earlier. It was also mentioned yesterday, you know, the speed at which to set up good public-private collaboration, the speed it's going to be slower. The resources are more. You need to take time to build that foundation. But of course, public sector and private sector work at very different speeds. So how do we maintain a process that will meet the needs of both? The private sector works much faster, the public sector slower, but we need to work together. So I think it's a really good point to keep remembering. How do we maintain that quality of a process, but bearing in mind the different party needs? I was also going to reflect, I did put it in the note earlier, so thank you, Luca, for bringing the coffee sector to the discussion. There's a really good example of a public-private process happening within the coffee sector, and many of the FALOR countries themselves, about 7 or 8, I think, are involved, have coffee as a key commodity. So the International Coffee Organization's public-private task force is a good example where it did take a while, so about a year or so, to really put in place the foundations of what this task force would look like, with participation from nearly all of the important roasters and traders in the coffee sector, Italy's a member, as well as the national governments and supporting organizations. I think what's been interesting to hear from the private sector, so many of the companies, is this is a great forum. We need to collaborate beyond our value chains for exactly some of the points we've just been hearing. And Luca, you mentioned some of these. You know, as a trader or a roaster, I'm investing in Peru, in my coffee farmers. I brought in our R&D, we're improving productivity, we're doing all of that. We're investing a lot, but it's not my responsibility to provide some of those underpinning enabling environment things. And those coffee farmers will not stay in those communities unless there's good infrastructure, roads, etc. So the need to be at a forum, as Matthew said earlier, pre-competitive forum, to be able to have some of these discussions has proved to be really, really important, and has started, and again, it takes time, but it started to give the next step. So private sector is investing a lot in some of these communities, public sector has. How do we scale up and combine these efforts in order to achieve the scale that we want? So it's really proved to be a good vehicle. That we've heard many companies saying this is exactly the kind of collaboration we need, and it's happening at cluster level, at district level, laddering up to national level discussions where needed, and that's the great thing about FALOR is as well, we can scale up to then regional and global level, because some of these issues that we're finding are not going to be dealt with even at a national level. We're talking about systemic issues. So being able to think in that way has proved to be really, really helpful there. I also another just to share again the other experiences that we've heard in the companies that we work with in the cocoa sector, for example, in West Africa. Again, we know that's covered in the FALOR program in Côte d'Ivoire and so on. Many of the private sector companies are only focused with the cocoa farmers and really focusing on the productivity aspects and living income and so on. And we are now hearing these companies say, I need to look beyond that value chain, because in this landscape I'm operating in, there's a logging companies, there's rubber, there's other things. So I'm a cocoa company there, how do I engage with those? So providing the forums that FALOR is providing in many cases of being able to have these spaces for dialogue and collaboration is going to be really, really key. So I think it's great that we're hearing and seeing examples where companies thinking beyond their very direct value chain is proving to be important. And just one last point, which was a bit of a light bulb moment for me a few months ago, is looking at the coffee sector in Ethiopia. And I know we had colleagues yesterday from Ethiopia on the call. Very often, especially with private sector, we think about our farmers. Luca, you just mentioned it, the coffee farmers that we source from. And working with government organizations in Ethiopia who have an understanding of the full community, there's many landless, especially female-headed households there who do not have land and are not coffee farmers, but they are the ones providing labor for coffee farm. So we need to also be focusing then. So again, thinking beyond your value chain, thinking more about working at that landscape level with other actors, taking into account these other factors, does bring about hopefully more of a resilient and sustainable value chain for many. So there were just a few reflections I had listening to the work of the presentations of today and yesterday. Thank you, Greta. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Christina, for this also great contribution. Anyone else would like to comment? Otherwise, Matthew, I think we are ready for going into a break of 5 minutes. Is that correct?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break and we will recon. Oh, I see somebody has a comment.
Okay, thank you.
Please, Scovia.
Yes, go ahead.
I thank you very much. My name is Kovia. I'm from CAF Africa. I just wanted to comment that I think collaborations, like we are saying, will enable us to think especially beyond the box, so beyond our value chains. For example, if we look at a project, in most cases, we know that projects are fixed in terms of time, resources, and everything. So in most cases, if we are implementing, what we are focusing on, for example, is the beneficiaries of that project or achieve that target. But if we go beyond and collaborate both at public and private level, for example, then we are opening up. And so in the end, you find that you are thinking beyond the value chain, because I remember before we used to have a project where the focus was mainly coffee, but then with collaborations, we realized that the partners were telling us that, for example, now you are dealing with, let's say, the youth and the women, and coffee is, we know it's a perennial crop, but then why don't you think about promoting, for example, other enterprises? Like say bananas and beans that are going to at the end of the day, the women, for example, will engage in these farms. Of course, because as a lady, I know my focus, for example, will be, let's say, food security. But if you say you're talking only coffee, and then you will say our registration, for example, would register more men because you're promoting a show or an activity and you're only talking about coffee. But then we started looking at other enterprises that support coffee and realized that the participation of women was increasing. So I think collaborations will be very key. Otherwise, if we keep it at project level, my focus will be to achieve the targets of this project, and that will be all. But if we increase our collaborations, especially with government, and again, just to make one comment, very often we think that maybe as private sector, maybe government is very slow, maybe they have bureaucratic processes. But again, with experience, I realized that that may not necessarily be true, because I think the issue is as projects, again, as I said, because we are more focused, we have time, we have this. So sometimes we want government, for example, to work at our speed, forgetting that we are just complementing government and they have other activities. But if we really took the time, for example, to explain, for example, to government or the public sector what our ambitions are, and then give them the time, the opportunity, because if you are complementing my effort, for example, to me, that's the role of private sector or projects, for example. So you do not expect to just come to me one day and say, I want you to do ABCD. Sometimes we just go to them and say, maybe sign here or give me this list of farmers without really explaining. You have to convince me that you are really complementing what I am doing. So I think if we think that way, then we shall find ourselves, I don't want to say naturally, but naturally kind of going beyond our value chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Scovia. And I can see also there is Bonsa from the Ethiopia Coffee and Tea Authority. Maybe, Matthew, if you agree, we can just allow him to make any comments if he wants before we go for a break. Yes, good. Bonsa,
Yes,
if you gonna intervene, please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think I heard somebody, there's no representing Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority from Ethiopia. So just I respond to that. We are here from Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority. Also, we attend yesterday training session. Just to brief this. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Bonsa, for being here with us. If you have any other comments or questions in the next during the training, feel free to raise your hands or put in the chat. Thank you. Then, Matthew, I think we are ready to take a 5 minutes break. We will, please don't leave Zoom. You can just switch off your cameras and be back at in 5 minutes at 19. Thank you all.
Thank you.
One in firm on the jam again and then go belly job and jom and yell back. I'm the Billy Gang, DJ Billy Gang, get the Billy Gang. Dapo Allah ke mojur Senegal, damu Senegal punya pedinong, damu Senegal punya perangin, cedek lupa api nujeri.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, I hope. A lovely musical interlude. Good selection there, thank you. I think Greta is going to share some discussion questions that we can put in the chat as well. I think we have a Google Doc where we can, if some folks want to put anything in writing, that's easier. And while she's doing that, or soon, I'm going to present a few more things, looking at kind of some more roles for different parts of the value chain and different corporate functions as well. So we will do another short presentation, and then we'll open back up for final discussion of the workshop. So yeah, Greta, if you just put those in the chat while I'm presenting, and folks take a look and start thinking about any comments you might start my screen.
Sure.
In thinking about sort of the next steps following this workshop and practical things companies and project teams can do, we want to look at some different examples of what does this mean for you. So companies in different parts of the value chain, different roles to play. So there are actions that all companies can take while engaging with governments and with multi-stakeholder platforms, depending on their role. So we've talked about some of these, particularly from financial institutions, and I'm not going to read everything here, but I think looking at the participation in landscape and multi-stakeholder forums, we've discussed aligning things like key performance indicators and objectives with national commitments and national action plans is very key. On the producers, primary processors, and input providers, these are could be large scale farmers, traders, the primary, immediate processors, mills, and even, fertilizer companies and other input providers. There's roles to play in, ensuring there's representation from smallholders. And I think the data sharing is a key one. This is a aspect that it can prove quite challenging because there's many of the input providers, biotechnology type firms, even firms that provide satellite monitoring and things like this have a lot of that information can be proprietary, and they are reluctant to share that sort of data that takes resources to collect. And I think that, but being able to share that sort of data is crucial to being able to actually, adapt new practices and, shaping on the ground change. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Financial institutions, as Lara and others have mentioned, play a particular role in incentivizing commodity transformation. And then we're looking at manufacturers and brands and retailers. So that's sort of the downstream of the supply chain, looking at the consumer facing end more. That's where, raising awareness with customers on the importance of creating enabling conditions for sustainable production is key. I think, that we also discussed already some of the pre-competitive collaborations that can happen in upstream and downstream, and incentivizing suppliers. So if you're a downstream company, consumer facing, offering a profile, providing access to opportunities, technical support for that pre-competitive collaboration and partnerships is key, and raising awareness of consumers on the importance of collaboration. So I think all of the different types of companies in a value chain have play. And it also depends on within a company what different parts of the different departments of a company they have different roles to play. So looking at cross-departmental, so you have oftentimes the sort of front line of engagement when it comes to sustainability tends to be sustainability teams, at least in large companies that have such functions. So they are already looking at issues around environmental and social risks, developing strategies for multi-stakeholder collaboration and business investment cases. And so I think that's obviously, those are key areas, but looking at marketing and communications is another one. So that's where you can educate employees within a company, raising awareness among the internal stakeholders, that there's not ideas, silver bullet or sort of so-called singular solutions. Communication is obviously key to being able to tell consumers, customers, and the wider public what you are doing in these types of engagements. And so that's the role of the marketing and communication department. C-suite, meaning the leadership, the CEOs within a company. Obviously, you could argue that's the most important area within a company to focus on these topics. And if you're talking about higher level of engagement with, ministers and governments or even heads of state, that's likely to be at the C-suite level. And if you can establish support and buy-in from that level, that can really filter out throughout a company. And so I think that's key. Any company that has agronomy and farmer support, that's where you're really getting to the on the ground technical assistance, collaborating on technology, data sharing, resources, traceability, etc. And then increasingly, I think especially for the large companies, this is perhaps more true, the procurement and sourcing teams, because they are sort of the front lines of the value chain. So aligning purchasing criteria to support enabling conditions for sustainable production, engaging in long-term relationships and long-term contracts with suppliers, I think is increasingly being seen as a risk mitigation strategy from companies. So rather than spot markets and commodity market purchases, engaging, developing those relationships, again, kind of coming back to all this work takes a lot of time, and so I think companies are and should begin seeing those long-term relationship development as key risk mitigation strategies and just key strategies in general for securing their supply, for improving the landscapes and the communities from which they're sourcing. And I think that's kind of all together there. All right, I think, where do we go next? So obviously we've discussed a lot of different topics, and this is in the context of the Fuller program. So many of the projects are just getting underway. So I wanted to reiterate here that this is the first step. These workshops are kind of the first stage of thinking about how the private sector can engage governments in the context of the Fuller program. So obviously, a crucial next step, and strategic actions to address the risks we've discussed, increasing resilience, multi-stakeholder approaches being quite important. Multiple benefits can accrue from private sector participation, and there's obviously various levels of engagement we've discussed, from in terms of the low to medium to high. The previous slide that we had on engagement doesn't necessarily have to mean deep financial commitments from a company, at least not to start. There's lots of different incremental steps that can be taken. And then we just discussed different parts of the organization and parts of the value chain. So all key things to take away when thinking about next steps and engaging under Fuller. And I wanted to introduce, we had thought about doing this as an activity, but I think in the interest of time and given the virtual nature, I think this type of work is actually better suited to a smaller group that can really focus in on singular topics. So the corporate action matrix is something that our team has developed, which companies can use to identify types of actions they can undertake at different levels and through a form of their actions. So if you look at the matrix here, it's looking at, what can you do from an individual company or supply chain standpoint, and then what can you do through collective action that's coordinated. So uncoordinated meaning within your own kind of fence lines of company, coordinated meaning with other companies or other stakeholders, and then really collaborative meaning with governments and that wider kind of multi-stakeholder space. And so basically you can plot current and planned activities in this matrix to identify where there might be gaps that should be filled. And it works best when you're focusing on a particular issue. So let's say farmer support. I'll show an example of this being completed next. But you can focus in on a particular sourcing region or a particular commodity or a particular issue, as I mentioned. So this would be a good activity to do in follow-up workshops, I think, when we can really focus on a key commodity or a region that's relevant to the follow project. And so we'll be looking ahead next year and beyond, doing more workshops. So this is one type of kind of thought-provoking exercise that could be part of those future workshops. This is an example of the matrix being completed for the issue of farmer support. So looking at the different geographic scales and then different, as I mentioned, different types of coordinated, uncoordinated, and collaborative actions that can take place. And I think, yeah, so Greta, that's all I have for presentation.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. I'm wondering if we can give some minutes to the participants to look at the questions that we have in the Google Share document, so that they can take some time, to reflect and fill it out, and then we can discuss it all together.
Yeah, do we want to share the screen with the document? Can we do that?
Yes, sure. I can do that.
As Christine is mentioning here, this corporate matrix was developed together with companies, and many have used it with teams and found their teams and found it useful. So, as mentioned, this could be a future workshop activity.
Thank you. And yes, I hope you can see my screen. If you here, there is the English version, and if you scroll down, there is also the French version for whoever prefers to write in French. So let us take a few minutes to reflect on these questions and also provide your views. Thank you.
So while people are thinking through these questions and filling things out, I did want to offer a reflection on Scovia's comments from earlier, which I thought were quite interesting. And it sort of relates to something we had discussed yesterday, but when she was talking about thinking about outside of a value chain, can also mean thinking outside of that particular commodity or crop, because obviously in a landscape, you have lots of different crops being grown, most of which are not designed for export to sort of cash crop export markets like cocoa, coffee, etc., but are key to food security and livelihoods locally. So I think companies that are primarily focused on a particular commodity, such as cocoa or coffee, can also be thinking about how those crops interact with the other agricultural products in a landscape, and what does that mean for the interventions and sourcing and thinking outside the value chain in that way. I think we haven't really addressed that in the material, but I think that's a key point. So just wanted to offer that as a reflection. And not to call, I see Jean-Marc is on. We had been a breakout room yesterday. He also had mentioned, just maybe I can call him out, see, but talking about the diversity of landscapes being important for sustainability as well, getting into sort of agroecology and the sort of topics key not only to healthy landscapes, but it does also help reduce physical risks and environmental impacts when you have a diverse landscape. So Jean-Marc, feel free to chime in if you'd like. If not, that's okay as well.
No, you did a perfect summary, Matthew.
Great. Greta, did you want to read through any of what has been completed in there? I think Elizabeth had written some things, right?
Sure. So some of the key greatest potential for collaborating between private and the public sector is the thing that they can play different roles, and yes, some barriers are lack of incentives and capacities of producers to go in partnership with the private sector, but also, I believe, with the public sector. How do you think this material is useful, especially for this program that we have been mentioning during the training, which is called FOLUR, Food and Land Use Restoration Program? This can serve to train all stakeholders, and I would like to reply to Elizabeth saying that we are here ready to support you if you need something tailored to your country, Benin, if I'm not mistaken, and how can be utilized for your own organization. This can also help, as Elizabeth was saying, other UNDP project teams and national structures and producers. Bonsa from Ethiopia, there is a potential to perform a lot of activities in collaboration with the governments and the other stakeholders. And Scovia from Uganda needs to establish sustainable permanent interactive platforms for dialogues between different stakeholders. So thank you very much for the colleagues that are contributing. We can give you some more minutes, and then Matthew, would you like? How do you like to proceed?
The floor is open for a few more minutes to offer any final reflections on the 2 days that we've been together. And I think, in addition, maybe Christina, you could also share kind of some of the work that we are doing under Fuller, and potentially future opportunities and kind of future country-based engagement in the private sector. So that might be a good way to spur any last-minute thinking, and then yeah, we'll wrap up soon after that.
Thank you, Matthew. Part of our support for the law programs is working with partners to have national teams and your in-country partners to think more strategically and strengthen the way that you engage with the private sector. So what tools do we have for doing that? The matrix that we've seen earlier is one of those tools, and as Matthew said, very useful. But how do I use that with my teams in Indonesia, in Uganda, in the different for law countries? So we will be offering a package of support for you and your partners to help you think through, what do we mean by the private sector here? What are we trying to achieve with this for law program? What are the objectives of the program? And who then do we need to bring in to this? Because the private sector isn't just companies. We've heard a lot about the finance institutions, but it includes producer groups. It's a broad group of stakeholders that we need to identify who are the right ones of all of the hundreds of thousands that there are in your particular landscape. Which ones will be most important to bring into the spaces that you're working in? So how do we identify them? We also have tools to help you prioritize of all of these, who would make most difference to what we are trying to do. So who should we bring in? It might not be the names we think of immediately. It might be other private sector actors we haven't yet considered. And I think the fact that we've had Lara really talk us through some of the financial institutions is great, because that still is a bit of a gap in some cases. In Matthew, I think you mentioned it earlier today as well, and other colleagues have as well, but are we also identifying the national private sector actors, not only thinking of international? So we're offering you tools, practical tools that we can walk through with you to apply to your situation, to help think through that range of actors, and then how do I deal with them? So how do we work, or specifically, how do we have tailored engagement strategies? Because everyone will have a different approach depending on how we think they can come into the collaboration spaces we're setting up and the work that we're trying to do. So through the global platform, we are sharing that. We've started having some calls with some of the country programs. Of course, using the matrix that we've just shown, as I said, will be part of that, because we found it is a very useful tool and something very practical that you can sit down with companies, and they found it very good for working with national and district level teams. So happy to walk you through that as well. So we are at your disposal, and we are looking forward to working with you all in the coming months and years. Thank you, Matthew, for the opportunity to promote a bit the work, the support that we are here to provide.
Great, thank you, Christina. Yeah, I think we can go ahead, and I think the FACS community had a few things to there's a survey, but I'll let Alex or Philippe talk about that.
So yes, thank you everyone. So Philippe will post in the chat box a link to a survey. It's a very short survey. It won't take more than 3 minutes of your time, and we would appreciate to get a feedback about this workshop, but also about your further training needs when it comes to value beyond value chains. And also we invite you, of course, to join the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community for those of you who are not members yet. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex. Laura, I don't know if you had any final reflections, thoughts?
Oh, not really, Matthew. Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for joining. I think my only comment is, indeed, I think now is sort of the opportunity to start reflecting on how to socialize this approach within national financial roundtables and associations. So that's maybe something for the Fuller projects to start considering how that can be achieved. Thanks, Matthew.
Great, thank you, Laura. All right, so we are having, if anybody is interested in attending additional workshops, or if you weren't able to attend yesterday, perhaps, we're having 2 more sessions similar to these. The next one is in the end of November. It is designed more for a Latin American audience, but all of the workshops are open to anybody across the Fuller programs. And it's actually, it is an interesting opportunity for kind of cross country learning. And then there's other different commodity focuses depending on the particular region. So we also will have one that has a more Asia Pacific focus in December. So those are upcoming as well. And yeah, we will obviously be in touch with the community and email to those of you who we have connected directly. Do please reach out with any questions, comments, thoughts, anything. Thanks everybody for attending. And I hope this is just the start of our engagement, and we will see you all again.
Thank you, everyone.